Hi all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer based in Charleston, South Carolina, who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. The Southern Fork is honored to be presented again this year by Townsend Automotive in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. For more than 48 years, the Townsend family of dealerships has been a locally owned company built on service and connection with its customers. And their experienced team can walk you through the car buying process side by side, from test drive to service oil changes and beyond. Townsend goes through a rigorous vetting process to make sure that every pre-owned vehicle adheres to quality standards. And right now, there's plenty on the lot to choose from in various makes and models. Visit townsendhonda.com for current inventory, or if you're in West Alabama, stop in. Townsend Automotive salutes local entrepreneurs, from restaurateurs to podcasters, and they welcome you to be part of a community that does the same. What if two of the 21st century's largest problems, rising seawater levels and excess carbon dioxide, could be leveraged into next-gen sustainable agriculture? That was the daunting research question that Sam Norton posed when he was in graduate school, and what eventually grew into Heron Farms in Charleston, South Carolina. Heron Farms' most recognizable product is the Charleston Sea Bean, produced in the hydroponic farm right off Meeting Street Road without any natural sunlight or freshwater. Chefs and home cooks, including me, have taken to it as a salt alternative, especially as a finishing salt type garnish. But it's by no means the only thing happening at this cutting-edge company. From intense data collection and analysis methods to experiments that can help astronauts on space stations eat better, the humble, deliciously edible sea bean collecting seawater in its cells with every tide is just the beginning. Welcome to the Southern Fork.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're having me in the middle of a major regular work day here at Heron Farms in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes.
There's a cat. There are people building things. There's fans for hydroponic work.
Yes, there's hydroponics happening in the farm.
Yeah.
And those fans you just saw in the warehouse. We're building a prototype desiccation room, aka a room to dry things, to build up a larger model at our farm in Texas.
Mm-hmm. So, which is a new development since
yes.
I've been in here in April.
Yes, we have a new product, and we will produce it at this new farm in Texas, and I'll send you home with some.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk about it. Well, I've been eating your product, the sea beans, for a few years now. Of course, they showed up on restaurant tables here locally first, but I'm a big fan of Low Country Street Grocery, aka Community Supported Grocery, aka Lindsay. Yo, hello.
Shout out.
And it's great. And Abundant Seafood, you can buy it, so you can garnish your fresh seafood with sea beans. But I'm pretty sure most Southern Fork listeners do not know what sea beans are, so we're going to kind of go into that. You grew up in Charleston, so that's why you knew about it, right?
Yes, I grew up on one of those barrier islands off of South Carolina, and at Seawee, there's a camp that's sponsored by Clemson. It's called, I don't even know if it still exists, but it's called Seawee Camp. I'm sure it's an acronym, but anyways, we would kayak around during this camp, and they would show us things that you could eat out of the marsh. One of those things was called sea pickle, so I grew up calling it and hearing all sorts of different names: sea pickle, salt daddies, Gatorade grass. We ended up going with the moniker sea beans because that's what Whole Foods calls it, and they are a customer.
Well, they're also Whole Foods, so it helps.
They dictate a lot of product names. So,
yeah, they have a lot of pull, shall we say, in the market.
Definitely.
So obviously I'm in the world, the food world, and so I was familiar with them as a foraged good, but not a farmed product.
Right.
So, I mean, you're in poli-sci undergrad in College of Charleston, and you're working. Are you serving? Are you working in the kitchen?
Well, I was a carpenter. My brother called me one day. This is August of many years ago, and it's very hot to do carpentry in this town in August, especially when you're roofing and things.
There's a lot of things that are really hot to do in August in Charleston.
And he's like, "Hey, my roommate and I, Jesse Sandoli, are going to open up a fish market called 167 Raw. And do you want to be our first employee?" And so I said, yes, that sounds air conditioned. Turns out the air conditioner for that, the first spot on East Bay did not work very well.
Yeah, but, it didn't work very well. It was across from the street from Harris Theater and used to be Crew Catering.
That's right. And now they're across the street from us at Heron Farms.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, small world. Yeah. Small world.
I brought a friend, Sean Rifflin, and we had a hood grandfathered into the building. So over the course of the first 6 months, it transitioned kind of from fish market to restaurant, and I was doing any task needed at that place. Mm-hmm. I got kicked out of CFC and then got back in after a couple of years of character building. And I did my senior capstone on food policy, and I did it on a seawater agriculture project that Boeing was doing, growing what are called sea beans, but they're growing specific types of halophytes, these salt-tolerant plants. And so my introduction into that project led down this path of wanting to grow halophytes and try to address and think of solutions to many of the issues that we saw with that project, which were building up of salinity in the soil and the management of salinity and all sorts of other issues with pumping seawater onto land.
So for those people who don't live in Charleston and travel bridges other than the really pretty ones, we have a couple bridges. You drive over some of these bridges in the Neck area, North Charleston area around Daniel Island, which was a natural hammock island and was built up for planned development. And you have these kind of moon landscapes. They look very much like a lunar landscape.
Very much. And
when you're driving over, you go, that seems odd, but you don't really connect the dots. Yes. That is actually dredge, correct?
That's correct. And that is where my first experiment to grow halophytes was, in one of those dredge islands. And if you notice, they're way above sea level, and that's because every few years the Army Corps digs up the bottom of the harbor and they put the material in those spaces, and that makes us have a deeper port, which allows for bigger ships holding more cargo to come in and out, usually out. And
so that dirt, that earth that they dig up has to go somewhere.
Most of it goes to this 2 by 2 mile dump site, which is a couple miles offshore. But it's expensive to put dredge into a barge and then to ship it out there and dump it. And so the nearby sediments and the contaminated sediments all go into what you're describing, which are called confined disposal facilities. Daniel Island has over 1,000 acres of them under the Don Holt Bridge. Those are called Clouder Creek cells. There's 4 of those. They're humongous. And if you go further up the Cooper River, you'll find the biggest cell and the biggest marine confined dredge cell in the country called Yellow House Creek. And the famous one is Drum Island, which is right under the bridge. It was formerly a marsh called Town Marsh. And anyways, these are all were intertidal marshes. And the Army Corps used to just pump the dredge right onto the marsh. Clean Water Act required them to start confining it. And so they built these walls around, and now they dredge. The water is evaporated, and you are left with this desiccated, dried, salty, moon-like surface. And it becomes remediated by aerial-borne seedlings from a non-native species called tamarisk or salt cedar, and another one called Phragmites, which is the grass that you'll see in most of these places. So we're trying to put in the native halophytes that would be there if the tides were allowed to come in, and by dropping them in the spring.
Enter the sea bean. So salt is really bad for plants. So that's why salt water, like if you have a waterfront, beachfront cottage, you have to have pretty much native things because it's going to get salt on it all the time. You want to kill a plant, you water it with salt water. But a halophyte actually uses the salt as part of its ecosystem, right?
So there's a couple thousand of these halophytes around the planet, and not all are edible, but they are, if you're in Salt Lake City, your landscape is dominated in the low-lying areas by these types of plants, and they have evolved to coexist with salt. They don't actually like it. What they do is they put it in a specialized part of their cell, and they keep it away from all the other stuff. It'd be like if you had like radioactive material in your house and you stored it in some room you never went into.
And they're succulent.
And they're succulent. And that as you add more salinity to the water you're growing them with, they have to store more salt and they become more succulent. But like Spartina and other halophytes excrete salt. So they're not succulent, but they're a halophyte. And so there's a few different ways that halophytes deal with salt. Sea beans are the most salt-tolerant plant on the planet. And they do all three of the salt tolerance mechanisms: excretion, exclusion from the root zone, and succulence. And so they're a model species for people that are studying halophytes because they are the most salt tolerant.
And once they're introduced and they take hold, they begin to change those desiccated places.
Yes, they do this naturally.
Wendellberry might even call them desecrated places.
You should. We need to start thinking of them like that because the Army Corps doesn't yet, and for good reason. Their job is to maintain navigable waterways. Doesn't matter if it used to be a marsh. But as we get to a reality of having a lot of water in our environment, we need a place for it to go. And we need a place for wave energy and hurricane energy and tidal energy to be attenuated. And the salt marshes do that. And we've turned 3,300 acres of salt marsh in this county into confined dredge islands. It's not a good idea.
Right.
But yes, their natural role is to be a salt marsh band-aid. And so in the natural processes of the marsh, Spartina, I'm sure you've seen all the dead Spartina on the beach in the winter.
Yes.
Those things float up into the high marsh and they compact and they create a salt pan, a tidal flat, a really salty bare patch. And Salicornia, these succulent halophytes like sea beans, they come in, they start to grow in this area, they pull salt out of the soil, and then Spartina can come back in. And so this is the way the marsh flows through its cycles, and we start to see these plants more often nowadays in human-encroached landscapes because we create lots of bare, salty patches.
And how did you connect that to the restaurants? Because now this is a food product that not only restaurants and chefs are really excited about, but home cooks are starting to really embrace. It's a lot of fun to use. It's
a lot of fun. Most of our customers are not restaurants. They are individual. It's a retail size 1 ounce pack. To date, we have 200 and something thousand 1 ounce packages that have been delivered around the country. So that's a lot of folks interacting with sea beans, and that is because we have described them as an alternative to finishing salt or an alternative to table salt. And so people are able to think about them in a wider range of contexts, just like if they were going to reach for the salt shaker, they can reach for a plant instead. So this is a very weird thing to imagine, but once they taste it, they realize that it is, it has compartmentalized seawater. Mm-hmm. And it's going from a foraged delicacy that was only able to be used a couple seasons a year to more of what we're calling like the first plant-based salt.
Right. And so because of the hydroponics, I mean, you're doing things here in a farm. This is a hydroponic farm. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of basil in here as well, right?
There are other, yes. There are.
I'm obsessed with basil, so I remember the basil from the tour.
It smells great. And in the salt marsh, water, you imagine seawater is coming up through these plants, sea beans and spartina and stuff, but they're not holding on to the water. They are using it to bring nutrients into their bodies, cells, and they're releasing pure freshwater vapor. That gets condensed in the atmosphere and it comes down as rain. Mm-hmm. In a grow room, we are able to recapture that evapotranspiration process. So if you put in 1,000 gallons of seawater into our system, the sea beans and other halophytes will turn it into 870 gallons of pure water vapor, which is condensed into 870 gallons of water. And that we use to grow glycophytes like freshwater normal plants, like basil, lettuces. We'll be experimenting with strawberries soon. And so that's why you smell the basil. We have a lot of extra fresh water.
This is so fascinating. And I remember when I met you this spring, and of course we've been in contact over the years, but spending time with you, I just like how your brain works, because this is, number one, this is really interesting to watch grow. But two, and that is not the pun that I wanted it to be, but honestly, it is, because I remember when this project started. Secondly, it's making sense from a business standpoint at every point. A lot of times in this world, we have a division between doing something good or doing something profitable. And you've brought them together.
Well, we're trying to. They're not always aligned. So, for example, those 200,000 packages I mentioned before, it costs us an extra few cents to put those in a plant-based package from corn cellulose. And even that has its own issues with how well it breaks down. And so eventually you get to a point on every business decision where you got to make a decision, and the more environmentally friendly decisions sometimes are more expensive. In the case of packaging, they are. And, we just saw a study out of the Citadel showing that corn cellulose packaging doesn't break down very well and ends with, and it has its own set of issues. So the way that I think the best way for us to approach it, and this is what we're trying to do, is to, when we do our restoration in each spring, this is slightly a rant, but it's frustrating to be a human and realize that nature you need your help to be fixed, and it just needs to be left alone. And so in the restoration context each spring, instead of trying to manage this plant, that square foot, etc., what we're doing is spreading the native plants in a polycultural way. So just let certain plants at certain elevations grow, just make sure they're native, and then just leave it alone. And nature will do the rest. And it doesn't even need us to kickstart it. It just, by us kickstarting it, we make succession happen faster. So anyways, those two things aren't always aligned, but I think we'll see a lot more businesses this century, and we're seeing that already, have these tag-along promises.
Tag-along promises. That's a really good point, because you were saying, okay, these islands are here. And so how can I get the Army Corps of Engineers on board to let me out there to put this on there so that, our ecosystem improves instead of decreases? And you said, well, they could use the land quicker. And so that's kind of where you're working right now. Eventually, it would be awesome if that wouldn't have to be a solution, but it's a tag-along solution for them. So they're like, great, you're only going to help us. Yeah. And at the same time, you're thinking about the process and going, hey, if I collect this vapor, then we can use this. So then where does Texas fit in? Because that's a completely different landscape than where you're sitting.
Yeah, it's a lot different way of farming and landscape. But just to clarify the Army Corps' role, it's easy for us to make them out to be the boogeyman, because we can say those 3,300 acres should be salt marsh again. But the people in the organization know that we want to get to a place where those are back to native plants. They're back to attenuating the wave energy. It's just implementing those changes in a bureaucracy that big is hard. And so they are on board with ideas that lead us towards native plants, but they really are on board when those same ideas lead to cost savings on their end. And so we have had to change that experimental design to be more focused on their ability to dredge in faster cycle times than just saying, hey, native plants should be there. And it's less of a moral argument, more of an economic one. But
yeah. Thanks for that clarification, because I think that is important. We can't really move forward if we're creating villains the whole way.
Yeah, and they're not. The people in the organization, and they're doing this in Savannah right now, protecting some of those dredge islands for waterfowl sanctuaries. A lot of people worked really hard to get crab bank using dredge material to rebuild.
Right.
And that's one of those things where we need to build on that momentum to turn some of those dredge islands back into marsh. Because if you read about Drum Island in particular, it was the largest heronry in the county because these birds need to rest as they go as they're moving across estuaries this large. And
even if you don't care about birds, which we both think you totally should, marshes, that attenuating wave energy means that marshes help protect areas from intense hurricane damage because they're actually able to absorb the storm surge.
That's correct.
As it comes on shore.
There's a push in DNR right now to build what are called living shorelines, and this basically means instead of having a rock wall in front of the marsh at your house, you would have the correct plants across the elevation, and they are showing that our grandparents are like, duh, nature does a lot better than a pile of rocks.
Yeah, we don't know how to do that.
The best thing about the salt marsh, especially to the audience listening, is that everything you've ever eaten out of the Atlantic Ocean either spawned in the salt marsh or ate something that spawned in the salt marsh. And all of that started by the raw material of the southeastern salt marsh, which is broken down spartina. So spartina is the main source of food at the bottom of the food chain. It gets broken down. It gets eaten by little organisms. Those little organisms get eaten by shrimp. Those shrimp get eaten by redfish. And the whole thing just, you end up catching a tuna in the middle of the Atlantic. And you're like, okay, how did it become this? And you get all the way down to the chain. And you oftentimes end up back at spartina.
Yeah. And the sea beans help that.
And well, they live amongst this. I should just salt marsh plants, basically.
Right. So what's happening in Texas, and what's the new product?
So people are using sea beans as a replacement for salt, but they're perishable, and it's a very weird looking alien plant, and so it's hard to describe to folks.
Yeah.
To use this as sprinkle it like salt, and they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah, you're like, it kind of looks like a little non-spiny cacti.
Definitely, it's one of the strangest looking plants because it got rid of its leaves and instead has created these little photosynthetic nodes. Unlike, there's not very many plants that look this odd. So our new product is to take halophytes, mostly sea beans, and extract all of that salt and nutrient-rich matter out, and you end up with the first granular plant-based salt. It's like sea salt, but it's slightly like tan, just like you would have raw sugar instead of refined sugar. We're going to create raw plant-based salt.
And that's just the next step.
It's why we need so much scale in Texas. Our Texas location is co-located with the largest shrimp farm in the country. And because of the amount of plant matter needed to pull all that salt out and then make a dent in the salt market, we need a lot of scale. So this Texas facility is pretty big.
Yeah, well, Texas has some land.
A lot of land. Oh my gosh. It takes an hour just to do anything down there.
It's true. You're like, I'll be gone for the afternoon. I'm going to try to get groceries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is it's exciting. And I know that the College of Charleston really helped with research projects and building that. And now you have a business and there's multiple people and activity and working. And I mean, You also, it's been announced, so I can say, you were able to grow things on moon soil, right? You got some things from NASA, right?
Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
Uh-huh. The University of Central Florida makes for NASA regolith simulant. Regolith is the word for moon or Martian dirt because it's not really soil. There's no organic content. It's basically like metals and glasses and these weird things that accumulate in space. And so it's
like space sand.
Yes. It's more akin to sand dust. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, so what the lab in Central Florida does is they try to create chemically and structurally similar soils. Folks can use that for research. We're lucky thanks to Cassandra Runyon at CFC, who also works at NASA, and the SCRA, and a new entity called Core SC, and Charleston County all come together with the aquarium to say, let's see if how do salt tolerant plants do on these Martian and lunar soils. It turns out they do quite well compared to their lettuces and the other things that have already been tested. Why? Because some of the same mechanisms needed to handle salt allow you to live in these kind of harsh environments. What we found in terms of which plants do the best, which again is one thing that our grandparents would be like, well, duh. But if you're ever walking through an old parking lot and you see some weird plant growing out of the crack of a parking lot, well, a lot of times that's a plant called sea purslane, or Buckhorn's plantain. It's a lot of plants that you'd be like, why is there's a plant growing out of the middle of that basketball court? And so basically a lot of those tend to be halophytes or slightly salt tolerant plants. And we collected seeds of those, tested them in Martian and lunar regolith and simulant, and 6 of the 18 we tested did pretty dang well. But you got to add nutrients after about a week because, again, it's not soil. It has no living matter to support a plant, so you need to support
Not like tamping down and, rotting Spartina,
right,
which is going to have that nutrient going back into
correct
marsh.
And for context, why the heck would NASA want to grow things on the moon when there's no atmosphere to actually do photosynthesis? The reason for all of this is that there will be a lunar base in 2028, and so astronauts need to have access to fresh foods, and recent study shows that their moods are greatly improved by growing their own foods. Trent Smith just grew the first flower on the space station, and there's a published paper about just the energy boosting, morale boosting outcomes of growing your own plants when you're in an environment that's harsh. But you have to grow it in a media. You can't just grow it in thin air, right? So every time we transport a pound of, let's say, dirt, for example, to the space station to be grown on, that costs $28,000. So the reason they're interested in what can we do with this regolith is we need to find out how much regolith can be supplemented into existing grow media so that we are doing less transportation of media to these stations. But there's also companies blending regolith with polymers to create basically look-alike to cement, and all sorts of interesting things being done with this stuff.
So you're really at the forefront of what food and environmental policy can really do, right? We're in an experimental phase, and thinking about the future of food and the future of growing things. That's pretty good for a guy who's 30 under 30 for Forbes. What's next? What's making you hungry?
I think the main thing is that, when we were discussing in the last time you were here, is that there's, sometimes they turn my mic off at these vertical farming conferences because they ask me to come speak, and then I start talking about how vertical farming is not a good solution. It is a good Band-Aid. A lot of chefs especially are realizing, and more people like yourself on the planet are realizing that the food system we need to head towards isn't a monoculture. It isn't industrial.
No.
It's actually something polycultural. It's smaller scale. It is nature wins the battle a lot. So I've got land in the Ace Basin where I'm kind of building. I've mostly finished the cabin, and I'm building out an agricultural model that is where I think a lot of chefs and I agree, and you agree, that that's where we need to be headed, which is a model that scales on its own. And this is something that you can't describe easily on a spreadsheet, which makes it hard to capitalize, right?
Right, because we were talking about farming. Agribusiness is different than farming.
Yeah.
That's really what we were discussing. And you can't organize farming. We have tried for 100 years now to organize farming in spreadsheets, inputs, profit margins. And what's happening is you're working against instead of with. And in order to continue to make that profitable, the scale has to be infinite. And that eventually is a house of cards that topples. And that's really what we see. Yeah, we are seeing that. Yeah.
It's toppling pretty quick because fertilizer inputs are being strained. The land is being strained. The freshwater resources we were counting on
and the farmers are being strained.
Yeah. Well, the American farming since World War II has been get as big as you can, contract your land out. For farmers didn't used to have to go to the grocery store. If you just grow soybean, and this is we still need the food, and so this is our way of growing food now. It's not that we're going to be able to shift towards this overnight, but we need to start thinking about a farm that takes 10 years to grow into the thing that you need, and once it does, you never have to touch it very much again, because it is multi-story, it's perennial, it's a little more diverse, and you can't describe the difference to like if you eat, a lot of kids don't like produce because they're used to getting a tomato from Harris Teeter. The tomatoes at Harris Teeter are specifically engineered, grown, and transported for one thing in mind, and that is shelf life.
Well, two things.
And looks.
That's right. Looks and shelf life.
Yeah.
So they want to be bright red, smooth.
Yeah.
No imperfections. Spherical because they pack really well.
Yep.
And they ship really well.
Noam Chomsky's daughter worked for a company that was trying to design a square tomato. I mean, just so it would pack easier.
They've done a square watermelon in Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the type of thinking that but the thing is, and we realized this interacting with these large retailers, it's not a boogeyman thing. It's like, hey, we have 10,000 customers coming into this place every day, and they want shelf stability. We have to organize ourselves around that ethos of shelf stability. So anyways, these kids eating these tomatoes are like, this is crap. And then they eat one off of a farm that the deer got 10, the squirrels got 3, and the farmer got 8. They're like, damn, that's a good tomato. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to build a business around that. It really is.
Yeah. So what's making you hungry is pushing that new revised model, right?
Yeah. But the grocery stores would be empty if tomorrow we told all the farmers they need to be diverse, polycultural, and they need to stop using pesticides. So we're in this weird treadmill that's hard to get off, and we need to start to come up with off-ramps that are longer-term thinking.
And not, once again, villainize, demonize what's been happening. We need to start, working together instead of, I'm not doing that. You're bad. You're immoral if you do that. What's one aspect of this job that is insanely awesome that you created for yourself? What is it that meshes with your personality here?
Well, for one, my desk is in the middle of the warehouse.
Yes.
On a U-line rolling rack. And that means that anybody can come up and talk to me anytime about whatever they're dealing with, and which seems not to integrate with my lifestyle of being at a cabin in the middle of the woods half the week and not dealing with people, but really learning through 167. I mean, we were dealing with a lot of people, and it was so much fun. And so I wanted to have more visitors to this place and make it feel a lot more open. And the more realistic, the more practical thing is that there's a lot of tinkering happening here in terms of like, okay, let's test this. What's the lowest cost way for us to just test this out? And not over-engineer and overthink, and just test this idea. And so all the, you saw a bunch of people going around doing God knows what. So I think some of my tinkeringness is reflected in this place.
Yeah. Yeah. Tinkering is good when you're innovating, right?
So to some extent, there's a lot of Amazon purchases up in the attic that people should probably come and take away from this place that were failed experiments.
I understand that too. What's one thing keeping you up at night? Just really quick fire.
Related to Heron Farms, it would be the Texas facility. I mean, this is a big undertaking, and we have a lot of pressure to do this well and to do it fast. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, I have a something that I reserved just for Southern Fork guests, and that is a magic picnic basket. So this is that dream meal question. I want to bring you a magic picnic basket full of things that bring you life. That when I say I can time travel and go back and get one more bite of something that you would love to try again, I can source for you and I can cook a little bit. What are some things that pop into your head that I can just put in that basket? It can be all carbs if you want it. A lot of people just do all meats. What can I bring you?
The first thing would be the chocolate milk from Low Country Creamery.
Yes.
It's like liquid ice cream. I've tried to put that into an IV and just live off of it, but it turns out to not work. That'd be one. A big old loaf of bread from Butcher and Bee or Tiller. Mm-hmm. A 5-pound pot of Jimmy Red Corn grits from Marchand. Some honey. Anyone nearby here. Legree Farms has pretty dang good honey. And then a bunch of veg from John Warren. You know, he's got the most beautiful, delicious radishes and peppers and all these things that always taste good.
Spade and clover and that fresh turmeric and ginger. Yeah. If you've never cooked with fresh ginger before, it's insanely amazing.
Yeah, and then the plant looks cool and it turns out to be somewhat easy to propagate around here. And then hopefully Mark Marhefko from Abundant would throw some fish in there, and I get my best boss of all time, James London at Chubby Fish, to cook it up in a way.
Any way that he chooses to cook it up, we're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, and then about a gallon of red wine. You can source that anywhere is fine. Preferably Tempranillo.
That sounds great. Well, if people want to learn more about Heron Farms and see what a sea bean looks like, since we are both sitting here trying to describe it as otherworldly, go to thesouthernfork.com. I'm going to have images there as well as links so you can check things out, look for sea beans. You might even see them listed on menus. You might see them in your grocery store. And that's all it's going to be coming soon. This is the coolest thing, and it is in a warehouse district that you would never know if you just come to Charleston for tourist time, and it is hiding in plain sight, and I can't wait to have more conversations with you. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, and welcome to Talking with My Mouth Full. I know it might seem a long way away from the cutting edge company Heron Farms, but Chow Chow Relish is also something that takes something familiar and makes something new out of it. And that is my newest recipe on Simply Recipes. You know that I like to run a no waste kitchen, and sometimes there's only so many fried green tomatoes one can eat. So Chow Chow Relish, especially this Carolina green tomato Chow Chow, uses the last of the green tomatoes in the garden and has some cabbage and some peppers, a little bit of mustard. I mean, it's delicious. And I loved putting this recipe together. It was, math is math, and developing recipes is a new skill for me, and I'm proud of this one. So I hope you'll check it out on Simply Recipes. All you have to do is go to that website. More than 1 million people do every year, and search for Chow Chow Relish, and it will come up. It is a very easy canning recipe, I promise you, because if I can do it, so can you. And you'll have Chow Chow Relish fresh from your late season garden to eat all winter long on top of those collards, on top of those beautiful black-eyed peas. And of course, if you have any leftovers, I'm already thinking about how good Hoppin' John is at New Year's. Leftovers of Hoppin' John with some green tomato chow chow relish cool from the fridge is really, really delicious leftovers, and doesn't feel like you're trying to not waste food. It doesn't feel like an assignment to not waste food. It just feels like a good lunch. So anyway, thanks for listening. I'll make it quick, and check out Simply Recipes. I have some new things on there, and I think you'll enjoy checking out the website. Until next time.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations, but in the meantime, I have one question. Are you going to eat all that?